so they could have a meaningful, sustained dialogue that would root out junk science and promote scientific integrity. To practically implement these goals, we propose an independent government commission. This would be free of political manipulation and intimidation of scientists. Members would have to be appointed by merit and could impartially peer review and provide funding for scientific projects. And they could also facilitate discussion between both factions. So they could find ways to bring the industry scientists and the industry people together with the local activists and anti-hydrofracking scientists, so they could deliver impartial information on hydrofracking.
Essentially, all scientific research is at risk of biases on the state, local, and government level. This leads to the environmental governance decisions based on inadequate data. Democratization of science and delivering policy analysis can help remove biases.
Questions? Did your interview with the lobbyists who are doing research give you any indication what the third-party research group was?
Yes, I think it's called IHS Global Insight. And I did go to their website and actually saw that it is a research institution that is used worldwide. So while it does give us some credibility, one thing that I was wondering about is who's actually paying for the studies, and it's still gas corporations. So while there is still bias in that, I believe that the research institution was fairly legitimate.
Who would appoint people to the independent government?
That was a question we were actually having trouble with. It would have to probably be Congress or the president, but we were hoping that if it was done, it would be people recommended by experts, basically, or experts. And they would have to have a lot of credentials. And we wouldn't be recommending industry scientists or even like local activists. It would have to be scientific experts on the subject.
I just have two questions. One is, you mentioned that the environmental impact statement didn't cite Engraphia. And was that the first one or the revision, do you know?
It was, the first one was written before their study, I believe, but even the revised one didn't cite their study.
Okay, so it was possibly the last. Then my second question is, so do you think that the peer review system that magazines like Nature and Science have, do you see those as being subject to, I don't know, do you see those as being threatened by biases also, or do you think that their system's okay?
We see bias in that system because, for example, there will be two studies, both peer-reviewed, that study the same thing but kind of come from different conclusions, and a lot of times it's related to who's funding it or who's conducting the study. And so even if the methods are sound, there still can be little biases. Like the Cornell study was on a 20-year timeline, whereas another peer-reviewed study was on a 100-year timeline, and both use the same models to estimate the greenhouse gas emissions of hydrofracking, but the 20-year timeline is the exaggerated one because it doesn't weigh nothing the half-life.
Also, we believe that any study has a risk of biases because as long as it's not done in like a laboratory setting, most of these studies involve like multiple people, multiple organizations, and even if you're not intending to have bias in a study, you might have an ideological bias, which will impact the results of your study.
Katie, did you have a question too?
Just out of curiosity, like how did you handle talking to like the people who are clearly pro-fracking? I mean, did it end up being an argument?
No, that's actually there's a story behind that. My father's actually a lobbyist for Virginia for the American Petroleum Institute, so I actually knew him since I was younger. So it was a fairly civil conversation despite our differences on the issue. But yes, you could definitely tell that he definitely had an agenda. And I was actually more impressed than anything by how driven people is by the issue. A lot of times I think for, especially in natural resource department, you can kind of see that a lot of it's motivated, you think it's greed or other issues that's kind of motivating that side of the industry. But from him I could really tell that the really driving force was he actually really just wanted to help America. He thought that was the way he could do it, by increasing jobs, by increasing revenue, and that's what he really saw was the right way. So if anything, I came back more impressed than anything else with the interview.
I also interviewed, so I heavily disagreed with hydrofracking, but I interviewed a Chesapeake researcher, and it was, sometimes I strongly disagreed or even thought what he was saying was, I don't know, I thought it wasn't completely true, but I guess it's an interview, I just asked him questions, I didn't really comment on his responses, then I asked him another question.
What about like the local activists? Did the points seem like they were really well supported, or?
Well, he just, he had personal examples. Like, he knew people in northeastern Pennsylvania that suffered from water contamination. So that was more where he came from it. And, he said that the government was working with oil corporations because of the money, and that you can't trust the government, so they have to do it themselves through the local organizations.
Yep.